Hello, my name is Kelly Barta. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am part of the itch work group with IDEOM. I deal with the conditions of atopic dermatitis. I've gone through topical steroid withdrawal syndrome. I've experienced eczema, herpeticum, and also chronic urticaria. So lots of different types of itch. I have had atopic dermatitis since I've been 4 years old. I was diagnosed as a little girl with just mild atopic dermatitis, and I have lived with that. I was treating with topical steroids for many years, 26 years in total, and also Protopic. And then I went through a condition called topical steroid withdrawal for several years, which was extremely severe and debilitating. And during that time, I developed or had an outbreak of eczema herpeticum. I had never had that before. It went full body, and that was pretty scary. I was hospitalized with that, and then I would get recurrent infections every month or so for about a year. And then I've also experienced chronic urticaria after COVID, believe it or not. I had several different episodes. So that comes and goes, but I've been living with itch nearly my entire life. I was recently at the World Congress of Itch with IDEOM, and I found it really interesting that they were talking about how there are different itches, whether they be inflammatory or neurological. And I was thinking to myself at the time, wow, that's interesting to think about because a lot of these itches will be treated by patients in different ways. And it could be another clue on actually figuring some of the puzzles around what's driving a lot of these different itches by connecting with patients and getting some of that information. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the different conditions I've experienced that have a symptom of itch, and then how I tend to treat that itch, and many people in the community do as well. So, and I just wanted to make mention too, I'm a patient, but I also have led several different organizations around skin conditions. I was the president and executive director of the Coalition of Skin Diseases. So I was very interested to connect with a lot of our different groups on what the symptoms were for their skin disease and how they treated it. And then I also lead the international organization ITSAN. So these are people going through topical steroid withdrawal. So I'm very much immersed in this community and hearing their stories all the time. So it's interesting to me when I think about my own condition, what I lean on, and then what others tend to lean on too. So just wanted to give a little bit of that information as I tell my story. So with eczema or atopic dermatitis, it has its own certain kind of itch. I would say in comparison to some of the other itch I've experienced, it's lower level, even though it can be really disrupting and keep people awake at night. But it's more on the surface, and it's intermittent. It comes with a flare up. And while it's annoying, it can be easily alleviated by bathing, moisturizing, just scratching it, kind of digging at that, or heat. That is something that I've used a lot of times, is heat to alleviate that itch. But TSW that I have gone through, it's a lot more severe than the itch experienced with just eczema. It's more of a bone deep itch. It comes with burning as well, which is really uncomfortable. In fact, when I went through TSW, it literally felt like I had been scalded with boiling water from head to toe. And I was bedridden with that condition. I could barely even turn on my sides. So the burning was really terrible. But the bone deep itch that came with it, it could last for anywhere. Well, it was chronic, but then these episodes would come up almost like an itch attack. And it reminded me sort of like a combination of a panic attack with itch. And you just literally want to claw your skin off, regardless of there's damage being done or if there's blood. It's so overwhelming, so torturous. It's just, you can't think of anything but that itch. It's really awful. And then unlike eczema, it supersedes counteractivity of heat or pain. It just goes beyond all of that. The only relief that I could find was when I was in the bath. And I would take baths every 2 hours while I was recovering in the worst parts with Dead Sea salts, because it seemed to kind of soften the water a little bit. The other way that I was able to alleviate that itch was through cold compresses. So I experienced eczema herpeticum 4 years into my recovery from topical steroid withdrawal. It just kind of came out of the blue and was really scary because it progressed so quickly. And the belief is that because of the immune compromise that happens in our skin from long-term steroid use, we're more susceptible to infections like this. It's very common in the TSW community, but within days, this virus had spread full body. I was hospitalized, nearly lost my life. But the itch that was associated with this virus was just unspeakable. I literally have no words to talk about how terrible it was. It was worse than TSW, if you can believe that. And because the virus is in the nerve endings, your nerves are just extremely sensitive. It's very, very painful. And I found the only thing that would relieve this itch was putting ice packs. So not cold, it was like straight up ice on this itch. And it took a while, but as the skin recovers is when the itch kind of is alleviated. And then urticaria, it's intense, but it's mostly superficial on the top of the skin, and it's combined, with a feeling of allergy or heat in that area too. So you've got the itch. If you think of like a mosquito bite, that's more like what urticaria feels like with those hives. And a lot of times it's alleviated by either like squeezing that skin or indenting with your nail, kind of like what you would do with a mosquito bite. And in some cases, cold compresses too. It was a lot. Like I literally could not put a sentence together when I was hospitalized. It was that painful. It was a terrible experience. But yeah, it's interesting to me to work in this group with IDEOM just because there are scientists who are understanding what's happening underneath the skin and looking at nerve endings and inflammation and all of the things. But I believe it's really important to connect with patients who are experiencing it in your body because we bring, another angle to that can help, I believe, lead to more understanding about what's actually happening in the body, come to conclusions quicker and treatments for patients quicker too. So it's been interesting being a part of this group and then having all of these different conditions that I've experienced to be able to draw from. I'm doing very well now. I'm high functioning, even though my skin is still sensitive. I still have episodes of, I would say, baseline eczema. So I'll have little rashes here and there, or when I'm sick, if I'm not eating well, things like that. Every once in a while, I'll have urticaria, but by and large, I'm doing well, and I'm really grateful for that to have reclaimed my health. I think some of the most debilitating symptoms of itch is, like I had mentioned before, it's so torturing. It does seem to trump pain in that you just feel trapped in this body that's just at any moment, it's very unpredictable. It can come when it wants. It's going to last as long as it wants. And it's front and center. It's hard to move beyond that. When you're itchy, and probably most people have experienced times where they have had poison ivy or just really bad mosquito bites. It's like that's all you can think about at the time. So that in itself is extremely annoying. The sensation of itch is awful. The sleep disruptance is really, really hard for patients and their caregivers, because if you're a parent with a child who's up all night crying, itching, you're not getting sleep. So it can take over your life. There's also a ton of stigma around itch. And if you watch people scratching, it's usually connected with, bad hygiene. And so people will often think either you have fleas or lice or some infectious disease, or, you're just a dirty person, which I would say probably people with eczema and skin conditions are some of the most clean people because we're so careful about keeping any irritants off of our skin. But I often dealt with that too, where there's just that social stigma around itch. And then the other piece of it would just be that it's really hard to find solutions to make it stop. And you can learn to live with it, but it's very disruptive in a person's life. So I was introduced to IDEOM by a colleague of mine who was a member of the Coalition of Skin Diseases that I was leading at the time. Her name is Susan Thornton. She led the Cutaneous Lymphoma Foundation, and she was part of IDEOM and saying, Kelly, you really should be a part of this. This is a great opportunity to get involved in bringing the patient perspective, because both of us are very passionate about that. And then she really just loved the people that she was working with in IDEOM. So I had reached out, got connected, went to a meeting and found it really valuable to be in the room with other researchers. Like I had mentioned earlier, it's just great to put our brains together and see how we can work together to find solutions. Yeah, so some of the highlights of working with IDEOM have really been meeting, getting to know, spending time discussing these issues with others in research. I never realized what a love I had for science. And I think it was an area in my life that had been laying dormant. And as a patient, you're kind of trying to puzzle things out on your own. My dad is in science. And so, I grew up with that sort of mentality to look at what we're dealing with and trying to figure it out. But the more I got involved with people who are actually working in the biologic space and looking underneath the skin, research and development, really finding out what's underneath the surface, and then putting the knowledge of lived experience together with that was really exciting. And I remember one of the people that I was really puzzling some of this stuff out with, and he was giving suggestions back to me, and it felt like Christmas morning, if you can believe that. It's like, because these are things I've thought of, but I don't have the background. I don't have the education that all of these researchers have had. So it's kind of cool to put these two bodies of knowledge together and see what you can do to help improve people's lives and really get to the other side of some of these really troubling conditions. I have been really encouraged to see the trend toward involving patients in the work around the healthcare system. And this is still growing and evolving, and I think we're learning how to do this as we go. But my hope for my involvement with IDEOM would be to help provide a clearer picture of what's actually happening in some of these conditions that are being studied. And then hopefully, like as a result of that, improving clinical care and improving the lives of people living with these conditions. And then my goal for IDEOM would be that overall in their work and mission, they would really put the people that this is all about at the very core and the center of the work by listening to patients, asking questions to really understand at the end of the day, we are the end consumer of the whole healthcare system. What are the needs that patients have? What are the hopes that they have? And then how can we equip them to be part of the process to find those solutions together? Because there's a ton of value, of course, in science, in medical education, and the clinical work and the clinical side of things. But we are people. We're complex beings that, I think it's interesting. Those researchers who I feel are at the most forefront of like cutting edge stuff that's happening, I find that these are the people who are the most humble because they realize the more we know, the more we uncover, the more we realize there are so many other things that we don't know. I think it's very, very important to have everybody involved in this work coming together to reach solutions, to be comparing notes. Like I mentioned, the body is so complex, and then the emotional piece of that, the psychological piece of that, it's all interconnected. The more we realize, I think it's interesting, even the connection with stress and itch or anxiety and itch. And then we're looking at studies how stress can affect the microbiome, which then results in rashes in the skin. There's so much to be looking at. So my hope for IDEOM would be that they're really keeping their eye on the center and on the core at the patients, making sure that, yes, we're asking questions, we're meeting the needs, the real needs, the felt needs of the people that we're here to really solve problems for. Because I think sometimes it's easy to get really focused on our work and then creep away a little bit from that. So I love that IDEOM has been putting a focus on patients, getting them involved, getting them equipped, because I think it's just good stuff in the future from here on out. Right. So my hope is that those who may be watching, that you realize that every single one of us has a piece of the puzzle. And it's going to take all of us getting involved, stepping up, having a voice, and then having the openness to figure out how do we collaborate together to make something really amazing. I'm a musician, that's my background. And I remember when I went through the process of topical steroid withdrawal and the recovery, and it was very isolating. I spent so much time alone. And I'm just going to give you this little story because it really changed my life. I mean, it was the backhanded gift of this terrible condition that I went through is that it gave me time for a lot of reflection. And in my background with music, I would have so much trouble writing. I had no problem, covering songs but when I tried to make my own, I just was always hitting this brick wall. And I thought of it in my mind as like this chest that was all locked up and it was inside of me. Like there's this creative piece, but it's locked up. Well, when I went through TSW and I really had to grapple with my own personal identity because I looked terrible. My hair fell out, I couldn't be anything for anyone. And so much of my life had been around, performance and making other people happy and living up to expectations. And I really had to hone into who I really was as a person. And I had to ask myself a lot of those questions. And understanding that and then starting to live that out as I got better and recovered and starting to see, oh my goodness, like I never realized this is the real me. Like I never gave myself opportunity to live out who I was. I started to see, that chest I saw locked up was never about music. It was about the real me. And then I started looking at other people that same way. Like, who are you? Who is that treasure chest? Like, I want to get to know you. I want to see what's inside. Because again, going back to my music analogy, it's like we are all these instruments. And when we play together like a symphony, we can create something absolutely stunning and beautiful. I look at this whole area in medical research the same way. It's like we all have something really, really unique, very important. When we can come together in a collaborative, open way and really share our piece, we can create something absolutely stunning and beautiful and wonderful together and really make a lot of progress forward that's going to help people and do good in the world. I know that, yeah, as I get older, and I think a lot of us feel this way, you want to leave something meaningful in the world. You don't just want to live for yourself. You want to do something meaningful. And with the time that I have left, especially because I have this new lease on life, I didn't know if I was even going to make it through some of those conditions that I went through. You realize I want my time to count and I want to make it meaningful. So anything that I can do to connect with others, make the world a better place, not just for me and my generation, but for my kids and my grandkids, I want to do that. So I love that IDEOM has been open to this and really is trying to pull in all the different stakeholders. I love like when I get into the room and there's people from the FDA, there's all of these academics, and there's people who are clinicians, there's patients. It's just a beautiful thing to see that gathering of everyone together, and then these work groups where it really is a place where there's permission to just be open and everybody provide insight in order to find better paths forward.